She collapsed before she said my name. Right there in the middle of a crowded art gallery, surrounded by people holding flutes of champagne and pretending to understand brushstrokes. 1 second, she was staring at me like she'd seen a ghost. The next, her knees gave out and her body folded like a paper bag. They screamed. Someone shouted for water. A man with slicked back hair rushed to her side, yelling, "Melissa! Melissa!" I didn't move. I just stood there, holding the invitation I'd received 2 days ago. No return address. No signature. Just a single typed line. "She'll be at the Wexford Gallery, Friday, 8 p.m. if you're still alive." For 5 years, I'd stayed invisible. Not out of strength. Out of weakness. I couldn't bear to be remembered. I left like a fog. Quiet. No questions. No explanations. I vanished because she asked me to, and I was too shattered to ask why. But this night, this gallery, this moment, had been planned. Not by me. Someone wanted her to see me. Someone knew what would happen. And now, she was unconscious on the floor, surrounded by strangers who didn't know her smile used to be the reason I got out of bed. Strangers who didn't know she once asked me to disappear from her life without warning anyone. And I did. I disappeared so thoroughly that I stopped recognizing my own reflection. I became a silent wanderer in diners and hardware stores, pushing brooms and folding linens just to keep from thinking. I forgot what my voice sounded like when I wasn't apologizing. She told me to vanish, and I took her literally. But someone had decided that 5 years of silence was enough. The gallery lights buzzed overhead. Someone handed me a glass of water, assuming I was part of the scene, maybe a cousin or coworker. I nodded, still frozen. And then the man beside her, the one who'd called her name, looked at me, looked through me, as if he knew exactly who I was. He didn't look angry or jealous. He looked panicked. She knew. He whispered under his breath. She said this might happen, that if you ever came back. He stopped himself. His eyes went wide. And suddenly I understood. She'd been looking for me. Quietly. Secretly. Behind his back. He didn't even know. But someone else had found me first. Someone who wanted me here. Someone who'd watched both of us all along. And whatever had happened in those 5 years I was gone, it wasn't over. They wheeled her out on a stretcher 20 minutes later. Conscious, but dazed. She kept mumbling something under her breath that only the man at her side seemed to catch. He nodded, reassured her, stroked her hand, but never looked back at me again. I stayed behind as the gallery emptied out, acting like I didn't belong to her. And I didn't, not anymore. But it was all an act. My heart hadn't stopped pounding since she locked eyes with me. I should have walked out and returned to the nothing I'd built. But then the envelope fell out of my jacket. Not the invitation, a different one. I hadn't noticed it before. It must have been slipped into my coat during the commotion. My name was printed neatly across the front, in handwriting that stopped me cold. It was hers. Inside was a folded piece of paper. No greeting. No explanation. Just 5 words. Ask him about Carsonvale. My fingers trembled as I read it again. Carsonvale. A name I hadn't heard in nearly 6 years. A place, technically, a small, isolated town I once drove through with her on a road trip when we still smiled in the same room. We never even stopped there. She'd made a weird face at the sign and asked me to take the long route instead. I hadn't thought about it since. So why was she writing that name now? Why tonight, after 5 years of nothing? I left the gallery through a side door, keeping my head low. I walked 5 blocks through the cold until I found a hotel that wouldn't ask questions. I paid in cash. The kind of place where the TVs are bolted down and the curtains are too short for the window. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every few minutes I kept hearing her voice in my head. Not the voice from the gallery, but the voice from that night 5 years ago. The night she sat me down on the edge of the bed, hands folded calmly, and said, "I need you to disappear, and I need you to do it without making a mess." She didn't cry. I did. Not in front of her, but once I left. I bawled like a child into a hoodie in the back of a bus headed nowhere. She never chased me. Never called. Never wrote. But now she was collapsing at the sight of me, and writing me notes in her own handwriting, asking me to confront someone I didn't know, about a town we never visited. I stared at the paper again. Ask him about Carsonvale. But who was him? The man from the gallery? I had to know. I checked the event flyer I had grabbed at the entrance. His name was listed next to hers as co-host. Leonard Marchand, an art critic from Philadelphia. A man with a book deal and a public Instagram full of handshakes and champagne. I found his hotel the next morning. Not because I wanted answers, Because I needed something to tether me back to reality. I didn't know if she was dying. I didn't know if I was in danger. All I knew was that she had pulled me back into a story I thought was over, and I was afraid it had never really ended. The hotel clerk gave me his room number 2 easily. People always trust the ones who look like they don't belong. I went up to the 3rd floor and knocked 3 times. Leonard opened the door shirtless, holding a cup of coffee and wearing the kind of expression that assumes you're delivering something he ordered. When he recognized me, he stiffened. "What are you doing here?" he asked, voice low. I held up the note. "She told me to ask you about Carsonvale." He went pale instantly. Not confused, terrified. "No," he said immediately, trying to shut the door. I caught it with my foot. "I don't want trouble," I told him. "But she's in trouble, isn't she?" He hesitated, then motioned for me to come inside. The room was spotless. Not a single item out of place. Everything folded, zipped, closed. It didn't match the panic on his face. "I told her not to reach out to you," he muttered, pacing. "I told her it would open everything up again." "Open what?" I asked. "What is Carsonvale?" He turned to me, and what he said next, I wasn't ready for. "That's where she buried it," he said. "All of it. Before you met her. And before she ever became your wife." I just stood there for a moment, staring at Leonard like his words hadn't made it all the way into my brain yet. "That's where she buried it," he had said. "All of it." What the hell did that mean? I waited for him to elaborate, but instead, he crossed the room and shut the blinds. Every movement was nervous, tight, like he didn't want the walls to hear. "I told her years ago to destroy the photo. All of them, actually. She said she did, but I never believed her. If she's reaching out to you now," he paused, "it means she's desperate. Or afraid. Or both." "Leonard, I don't know what you're talking about," I said. "She told me to leave. She told me to vanish. And I did. I didn't ask for any of this. Now she's fainting when she sees me and scribbling ghost towns on paper. So either start making sense, or I walk." He gave me a look like he wanted to punch a hole in something, but had spent years learning not to. Then he sat down on the edge of the bed and, in a much calmer voice, said, "Carsonvale was a real place once. It doesn't exist anymore, not legally. It's buried under a new zip code now, mostly forest. Maybe 24 people still live out there. She lived there until she was 21. I visited once, years before she met you, and I still have nightmares about it. That's when I started to think maybe this wasn't just about some ex-boyfriend, or some mistake she'd made before me. This sounded bigger, deeper, older." Leonard continued. "There's a house at the end of a gravel road off Route 17. Doesn't show up on GPS. She told me she grew up there. Said her father built it by hand. She also told me never to go inside the cellar." He looked up at me. Of course I did. I didn't breathe. "What was in it?" I asked. He stood up and poured himself more coffee, hands visibly shaking. "A box. Wooden. Chained shut. The room it was in smelled like old water and rusted tools. There were carvings on the walls, like tally marks, but wrong. Jagged. Repetitive. I asked her about it afterward, and she just said, we weren't allowed down there growing up. That was it. So what does this have to do with now?" I asked. "With me? With her fainting when she saw me?" "She thinks it's coming back," he said. "What is?" He shook his head, looking disgusted with himself. "I don't know, but she started getting nightmares again last month. Waking up screaming. She told me she saw you in them. Said you were standing in front of the house, covered in dirt, eyes white." I swallowed hard. Why would she see me like that? "Because, Ezra," he said my name like it tasted bad. "She thinks she dragged you into it. By marrying you. By pretending she could have a normal life. She thought if she told you to leave, it would protect you. But maybe it didn't. Maybe it just bought her time." My mouth went dry. Time from what? Leonard turned to his suitcase, unzipped it, pulled out an old photo album, the leather peeling along the edges. He flipped it open and handed me a photograph without a word. There she was, Melissa, at maybe 20, standing in front of a house half swallowed by trees. Her expression was off, like she was smiling, but trying not to cry. And behind her, just barely visible in the shadows of the porch, was a man. At least, I think it was a man. The photo was warped, slightly overexposed, but the figure in the background had something wrong with it. The proportions didn't make sense. The limbs looked too long. The posture was twisted. "She told me that was her uncle," Leonard said. "But then one night, during a fight, she slipped and said, 'That thing on the porch isn't related to me.' And then she locked herself in the bathroom for hours." I stared at the photo again. Why are you telling me this? I asked him. Because I think she's going back, he said. And she wants you to follow her. He stepped closer. And if you do, you need to know exactly what you're walking into. I didn't sleep again that night. I just sat there on the edge of the motel bed, the photo in my hand, the note crumpled on the table, and Leonard's words looping endlessly in my head. She wants you to follow her. But to what? There was something grotesquely final about the way he said it. Not a reunion. Not a rekindling. Something more like surrender. Like she was returning to something that never really let her go. I thought I'd left all this behind when I walked out 5 years ago. When she told me to disappear, I obeyed. Not because I was noble. I wasn't. I left because I was scared of how easily she said it. Like she had rehearsed the moment. Like she'd always known it would come. And now here I was, holding a photo that felt radioactive in my hands, staring at a house I'd never seen, but already feared. By sunrise, I'd made a decision. I had to see it with my own eyes. I had to know what she left behind, and what was pulling her back in. It took 2 days to get there. The directions Leonard gave me weren't exact, more like a whispered warning you'd get from a bartender after last call. Route 17, left at the church with no roof. Follow the gravel till you stop seeing mailboxes. That was all. When I got to the church, it looked like something abandoned by time. Half the steeple gone. Roof caved in. Someone had spray painted over the entrance. Don't forget who you are. That part shook me more than I want to admit. I followed the gravel road like he said. No signs. No fences. Just a winding stretch of dust and fog that grew thicker the deeper I went. And then I saw it. The house. It looked exactly like the photo. Same porch. Same broken railing. Same two-story shape swallowed in moss and silence. But there was something else I hadn't expected. Smoke. Thin white trails drifting from the chimney, even though the place looked like no one had lived there in decades. My first thought, she's already here. I parked half a mile down and walked the rest of the way on foot, heart pounding so hard I thought it would shake the trees. Every step felt like it wasn't mine. When I reached the porch, I saw her, Melissa, sitting on the steps, wearing a faded gray sweater I remembered from our first apartment. Hair tied back, pale, gaunt, but alive. She didn't look at me at first, just stared out at the woods like they were whispering something. You came, she said softly. I nodded. I didn't know what else to do. She turned to me slowly, and I swear, for half a second, her eyes didn't match. One was the blue I remembered, the other darker, almost black. But then she blinked, and it was gone. I wasn't sure the note would find you, she said, or if you'd still be able to see me. That last part confused me. What do you mean? But she ignored the question. Stood up. Walked to the front door. You shouldn't stay long, she said. Things in this house remember. Remember what? Pain. I followed her inside. The air changed the second I stepped through the door. Not just the smell, which was wet wood and iron, but the weight of it. Like the walls were leaning in slightly. Like the shadows here were permanent. The furniture was still intact. Dust-covered but untouched. Nothing looked vandalized. There was a strange sense of care in everything. Like someone had been maintaining it. Someone who didn't want to leave, but couldn't stay. She led me to the kitchen without saying a word. Opened a drawer. Pulled out a box of matches. Then she did something that made my stomach turn. She lit the curtains on fire. They went up instantly, flames licking the ceiling, but the house didn't react. No alarms. No crackling. Just fire and silence. Then, as I stumbled backward to stop her, the flames went out. Completely. No smoke. No ashes. Just nothing. Like it never happened. She turned to me calmly. It's not just memories that live here, she said. It's the things that refuse to burn. I stared at her, shaking. Melissa, what are you doing? She walked past me, whispering something under her breath. If the box is still there, we're out of time. I hadn't been inside the house more than 10 minutes, and already the air felt like it was pressing against my ribs. Not hot, just close. Like something in the walls wanted to be exhaled, but had been holding its breath for years. Melissa didn't explain the fire. She didn't look at me when I kept asking what she meant by the box. She just walked through the old kitchen, past cabinets full of dishes that hadn't been touched in decades, but still looked recently rinsed. I kept expecting to see dust, cobwebs, anything that made sense. But everything was just waiting. Then I saw it. The door in the floor. She paused in front of it, barefoot now, her sweater sleeves rolled to the elbows like she was preparing to go into a storm. I whispered, "That's the cellar, isn't it?" She nodded once. Didn't say a word. The latch was old iron, looped with a hook that looked recently unfastened. She lifted it like it weighed nothing. The wood creaked open, revealing narrow stairs descending into blackness. No light switch, just a single hanging bulb with a pull chain that dangled like a loose tooth. "You don't have to go," she said, without turning to face me. "You can still leave. If you do, it'll never find you." "What is it?" I asked. "This house. That thing in the photo? What are you not telling me, Melissa?" She looked back at me with a face I barely recognized. The softness I once knew, the awkward laughs in grocery store aisles, the Sunday crossword habits, the way she used to fall asleep with one hand pressed to her temple, it was all stripped away. She looked like a version of herself that had survived something unspeakable and forgotten how to speak about it. "You loved me," she said softly. "You were the only one who did it without suspicion." "What does that mean?" She turned and started walking down the stairs without answering. And I followed, like a fool, like a husband who'd been invited to disappear and still came back when she whispered his name. The stairs were narrow, carved unevenly. My shoulder brushed the wall the whole way down. The further we went, the colder it got. Not winter cold, but concrete cold. The kind that felt like it belonged to the bones of the earth. Then we reached the bottom, and I saw it. The box. Exactly like Leonard described it. A squat wooden crate, heavy iron chains wrapped around it multiple times. Padlocked on every side. The floor beneath it was stained. Dark rings of moisture or oil or something worse. Around the box were marks on the walls. Deep etchings. Not symbols. Not language. Just frantic scratches. Layers of them. Some looked old. Others fresh. "What's in it?" I asked, my voice so low I wasn't sure she even heard. She sat on a crate beside it, fingers trembling as she reached into her pocket and pulled out a key, rusted, ancient-looking, tied to a piece of string. "You don't unlock it," she whispered. "You never open it. That's what they did wrong. My family." She looked up at me for the first time. "My mother opened it when she was 17. My uncle opened it again years later. I wasn't born yet. But they said the house changed after that. They started forgetting things. My brother died in his sleep. My dad put a nail through his own hand and didn't feel it. My mother stopped speaking altogether, until the day she whispered one thing to me. I couldn't breathe. "What did she say?" I asked. Melissa's voice shook. "Never love anyone under this roof." I stared at the box. I didn't want to be near it anymore. Every second in that cellar made my skin itch. The air was wrong. Too dense. Too silent. "Why did you bring me here?" I asked. "I didn't," she said. "It called you." "No. You called me." "The envelope. The photo. That was your handwriting." "I wrote the message," she nodded. "But not the address." That's when something inside me cracked. "What does it want, Melissa? Why me?" She stood slowly, walked to the box, and crouched next to it. Ran her fingers over one of the chains. "I told you to leave 5 years ago because I thought it would let me go if I gave it something else. Some kind of trade. I thought if I gave it space, silence, it would sleep again. And did it?" Her hand hovered above one of the locks. "No," she whispered. "It just waited." And then she added something that chilled me in a way nothing else had. "But now it wants both of us." I didn't run. I should have. Every part of my mind, what little remained functional down in that basement, was screaming at me to get out of there, to climb the stairs and never look back. But I couldn't. Maybe it was the way she said it. It wants both of us. Not with anger, not with desperation, but with resignation. Like she'd already accepted the ending, and I was just catching up to it. The air down there didn't feel like oxygen anymore. It had weight, texture. Breathing it felt like swallowing dust that remembered things. And I started to feel it, not hear it, feel it. The sound of something alive, buried beneath the house. A hum, too deep for ears but strong enough that my teeth ached. "Melissa," I whispered, barely holding it together. "What does that even mean? What wants us? There's no such thing as cursed places or haunted boxes. That's not real." She smiled a little at that. A slow, thin smile that looked more like regret than amusement. "That's what my father used to say, right before he built that box himself and locked my mother's diary inside it. He told her it was to keep her secrets safe. But it wasn't. He didn't want her remembering. Remembering what?" Melissa walked toward a rotted bookshelf by the far wall. She pulled something from behind it. Not a book, but a bundle wrapped in faded cloth. Inside it were photos. So many photos. And all of them wrong. somewhere of her, as a child, standing outside this very house. But her expression in every single one was identical, wide-eyed, almost sedated, staring directly into the lens like she didn't recognize the camera. Others were more disturbing. A hallway with scratch marks along the ceiling. A mirror showing something standing behind the photographer that wasn't visible in the room. A man's face, blurred violently at the eyes. But it was the last photo that finally made my knees weaken. It was me, 5 years younger, sitting on a bench I didn't recognize, looking off to the side. Someone had taken it without my knowledge. But that wasn't the terrifying part. It was the date scribbled on the back in red ink, a full year before I ever met Melissa. I dropped the photo and stepped back. What is this? You didn't even know me then. Yes, I did, she said, her voice flat. But you didn't know me. Not yet. I wasn't allowed to meet you until I forgot. Forgot what? She didn't answer. The ground vibrated suddenly. A low, pulsing thump beneath our feet. Not like an earthquake, more like a heartbeat. Slow, measured, ancient. Melissa pressed her hand against the box like it soothed her. When I left this house, I was supposed to die. That's what the stories say. But instead, I fell in love. It wasn't supposed to happen. That wasn't part of its design. What do you mean its design? She looked up at me. Her eyes were glassy. It doesn't care about love. It only cares about balance. About forgetting. About hiding the things too painful to carry forward. My father believed he could bury grief. And so he did. But the house keeps it. I stared at her. So this house, it remembers for you? She nodded. For all of us. It keeps everything that should have broken us. Locked it in the cellar. Sealed it in that box. Every heartbreak. Every betrayal. Every failure too heavy to survive. That's why you're here now. No, I said. I'm here because you dragged me back. Melissa walked closer, then reached into her pocket again. She pulled out a second key. Smaller. Sharper. She held it out to me like it weighed nothing. This one's yours. I didn't take it. What do you want me to do with that? Use it, she said. Just once. Just to see what you've left behind. And then I saw it. Something I hadn't noticed until now. There were 2 boxes. One in the center of the room. The one she'd always talked about. The one chained and rusted, surrounded by those claw marks and circles of salt and red string. But in the far corner, obscured by darkness, there was another. Smaller. Newer. Barely visible. And it had my name carved into the lid. Not written. Not labeled. Carved. I felt my chest tighten. I've never been here before. That doesn't mean it hasn't been watching you. I wanted to scream at her, but my throat was dry. She walked back toward the stairs, leaving me alone in the cellar. You can leave it shut, she said. That's what most people do. But if you ever want to remember what you gave up, if you ever want to understand why you walked away without a word 5 years ago, she looked back at me, then opened it, and then she was gone. Her footsteps vanished into silence above me, and I was left alone in a room that remembered more than I ever wanted to know. I sat on the cold cellar floor for what must have been an hour, staring at the smaller box in the corner like it was a living thing. The one with my name carved into it. Not written, not painted, but gouged into the wood like someone had done it in a fit of rage, or maybe grief. The key Melissa had given me felt hot in my pocket. Too warm, like it had just been forged. I didn't want to touch it again, but it was like the room wouldn't let me ignore it. The silence had started to bend. It had weight, rhythm, like a presence standing behind me just out of reach, breathing slowly. I kept telling myself none of this was real, that I was sleep-deprived, that Melissa had lost her grip on reality years ago, and I'd let her pull me back into the wreckage. But even as I told myself that, a different part of me, a deeper, more primal part, remembered. Not what was in the box. Not yet. But something else. The hallway in our first apartment. A door at the end of it that never opened. I remembered staring at it night after night, wondering why she kept it locked. She always told me it was just storage. But now I saw it differently. The same claw-like scratches were around the doorknob. I had ignored them back then, assuming it was just chipped paint. Now I realized they were marks, the same ones down here. And the sounds. The ones I used to blame on the old radiator. Clicks and sighs and distant thumps. They weren't mechanical. They were familiar. I finally stood and walked toward the smaller box, every step feeling like it cost me something. The closer I got, the heavier my legs became, like the floor was softening under me, resisting. I knelt in front of it. The wood was smooth but ice cold. The lid didn't have hinges, just a thin slot for the key. I hesitated. I could walk away. I could burn the house. I could pretend none of this happened. But I'd spent 5 years trying to forget a woman who told me to vanish without ever telling me why. And now, here I was, in a house full of the why. I slid the key in, turned it. The click that followed didn't sound like it came from the lock. It sounded like it came from beneath the floor. The lid lifted on its own, slowly, creaking like it hadn't been opened in centuries. Inside was nothing, just blackness. Not empty space, a void. Not a shadow, not a trick of the light. It was like the box opened into something else. I stared deeper, expecting to see the bottom, but there was no bottom. Only the feeling of being watched from inside it. And then the memories started bleeding in. Not images, sensations. Hands shaking. Cold metal. A ringing phone that wouldn't stop. The echo of a voice, my voice, saying something over and over again. It was my fault. It was my fault. It was my fault. Then I saw Melissa's face, much younger. Blood at the corner of her mouth. Crying. Reaching out to me from a hospital bed. I tried to pull away from the vision, but it clung to me like wet cloth. I saw a ring. A child's drawing. A pool of water with no reflection. I don't remember collapsing, but I must have. I came to with my head against the concrete, the lid of the box now sealed shut again, the key gone. I stumbled up the stairs on shaking legs, heart pounding like I'd run miles barefoot. When I reached the main floor, Melissa was gone. The house was dark, windows boarded now, even though they hadn't been before. I tried the front door. Nailed shut. I was trapped. I called her name. No answer. I screamed it. The house absorbed the sound. I turned a corner toward the kitchen, and that's when I saw something I'll never forget. Me, standing at the end of the hallway. Same face, same posture, but something in the eyes, like they weren't made for this world. Not angry, not afraid, just empty. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there watching me. And then he mouthed 3 words. You left her, and vanished. I backed away slowly, grabbing anything I could find. A chair, a broken lamp. I wasn't going to wait for whatever that was to come back. That's when I heard her voice again. Not from the house. From outside. Barely a whisper through the nailed boards. Ezra, if you open the box, you'll forget what you saw. If you leave it shut, it'll remember it for both of us. I shouted her name, over and over, punching the boards, trying to tear them down with raw hands. But the voice never returned. And the house started to change. I don't know how long I sat on the kitchen floor. Maybe hours. Maybe less. Time bent strangely inside that place. It wasn't like being lost. It was like being remembered by something else. The vision of myself at the end of the hallway wouldn't leave my mind. That hollow stare. The way he spoke without sound. You left her. That accusation hit harder than any scream could. But it wasn't just about Melissa. It was about everything I'd tried to bury. All the guilt. All the fear. All the things I didn't have the strength to face 5 years ago. I had left without asking why because I was too afraid to hear the truth. I had convinced myself that walking away was the only power I had left, that vanishing meant healing. But now, in this decaying house with no clocks and a box that knew my name, I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to believe. You can't outrun what you refuse to name. Suddenly, I heard something. A creak. Soft, distant, from the front door. I stood slowly, every part of me expecting another vision, another twisted echo. But instead, I saw light. Just a sliver. Faint sunlight peeking between the edges of the doorframe. And the boards, they were gone. I walked forward, hand trembling as I reached for the handle. It turned easily, like it had never been sealed at all. Outside, the trees were still. The fog had lifted. And she was standing there. Melissa. She looked older, but lighter, like something in her had loosened. Her hair was down. Her eyes, both matching this time, looked tired but present. I didn't think it would let you out, she said softly. It didn't, I answered. You did. She nodded, tears forming but not falling. I wanted to protect you. I thought if I made you hate me, you'd stay away from all of this. That you'd forget what I couldn't. I stepped toward her. What was in the box, Melissa? She shook her head. Not one thing. Not a secret. Not a demon. It's just memory. Pain. Everything we hide because we think we can't carry it. And this house. Her eyes moved toward the porch. It's where my family put their grief. And it fed on it. It kept us all numb. Until one day I met you, and it couldn't take you from me. So it waited. I took her hand. Something I hadn't done in so long it felt like a first time again. It can't have either of us, I said. Not anymore. The wind stirred through the trees. A bird called in the distance. Just normal sounds. The kind of sounds you stop noticing when you've spent too long with ghosts. We walked back down the gravel road together, in silence. No dramatic collapse. No monsters chasing us. Just two people who had finally chosen to remember and forgive. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. There were things we had both buried, choices we couldn't undo. But for the first time in years, I wasn't walking away from something. I was walking with someone. When we reached the car, Melissa paused and looked back at the house. I watched her lips move, not a word to me, but to it. Maybe a goodbye. Maybe a warning. She got in beside me, and as I turned the key in the ignition, I realized something that made me smile. For the first time in 5 years, I felt real air in my lungs. No heaviness. No guilt. Just breath. Just life. And her.